Good morning. So we're halfway through Shin Samach Gimel, Seif Chof Vav. We're on page Reish Chof Gimel. We're on the second line, in the middle of this long Seif. So we were talking about a Mavoi and the various criteria for what makes a good Mavoi, and what type of lechin, kairo would be needed, and we're going to continue this discussion now. So, Ein Mavoi Nitzar, with the second line in the Machaba. Ein Mavoi Nitzar, v'lechi ay kaira, a Mavi is not going to be remedied with having a lechi or a kaira there, the upright or the horizontal, ad sheyu pesuchim l'seichai, shnei chatzeres, unless that Mavoi has got two chatzeres, and each chatzer has two houses. Even if the chatzeres are open to each other. So if you look at the top picture on the top left there, that's the classic setup. You've got a Mavoi, and you've got two chatzeres leading onto the Mavoi, and each chatzer has got two houses. That's the minimum you need to call it a Mavoi, which is going to be remedied in the way we've described. Okay, let's do the Mishnah Berurah just on that little point. This is Sif Kot and Kuf Base, about 3 wide lines down in the Mishnah Berurah. So Shnei Chatzeres, Hatam Bezeh, the reason why you need a minimum of 2 Chatzeres is Mishum Dahad Tir B'Mavoi B'Lechi V'Kaira, that which we allow a Mavoi to carry in a Mavoi by way of a Lechi and a Kaira, Machmas Deyesh by Ribu Diyarin, because you've got a lot of residents, and they don't use it quietly, it's quite busy. Therefore, it's sufficient to have this remedy. As opposed to a regular chotzer, it's smaller, it's less residents. They use it for more private matters. And therefore, you need more of a hechsher for it, i.e., shnei pasin or pasarbo tfachim. You need 2 boards or a board of 4 tfachim, and not a lechin, it will not be sufficient. In this situation as well, when you've got 2 chatzeros which are not open up onto the mavui, you're going to have very few residents, and therefore the quieter it will be, the more private things you'll do there. It won't be enough to have a lechi and a kaira there. And really what you're going to have to do, as we'll see, is you're going to have a Tzuras Hapesach. That's the safer, the more comprehensive tikkun. Since they can, after all, make an error by way of their entrances, is considered one chotzer. And so too, if the houses are open to each other, we can be makel in this situation. Okay, let's go back to the Machaba. I'm 1, 2, 3, 4 wide lines down in our edition. Now, each entrance cannot be less than 4 tfachim, and the residents eat in each house because where you eat is considered a goyim, it's called a proper bias. Even if the father lived in one house and the son lived in another house, that's called shnei batim. Even though the father is supporting him and he's actually the food is coming from the father's house, nevertheless, harihim nidonim kashnayim, and therefore it could have the din of a mavoi where you've got 2 chatzeros with 2 batim, even though the father and the son, they're counted as 2 separate houses. Even if you've got one Jewish resident, that's called 2 houses. So let's just do the Mishnah Berurah till there. As opposed to if the son only ate in the father's house, then it will be called 1 house, it won't be called 2 houses. Okay, back to the Mishnah Berurah. Back to the Machaba. 3 lines on the bottom. Another criteria is you've got to have the Orach, the length of the Mavoi has got to be longer than the width. And if one of these conditions is missing, if you haven't got all of these conditions, for example, you haven't got two chatzeros with each one having two houses in them, or you haven't got the mavoi which is longer than it is wide, these things are missing, then you've got to have different remedies to sort out this mavoi to enable you to carry in it. Either you need Tzuras Hapesach, or you need pas arba'a or shnei pasin. A lech and a kara will not suffice. Says the Mishnah Berurah, kufhei she arkai shekain derech hamavoi liyaz. That's how mavoi normally is. Yoseh al rachboi afilu mashu, even if it's a bit longer than it is wide. Va'arkai mikri derech knisas lemavoi. What is the orach? The orach is the when you come in that direction. Or masha ain't a derech knisas mikrecha. What is not the entrance is called the width. The marka karachboi, because if it's square, then it's got a din of a chotze or chudele kamei. Echad me'elu. So if you're missing one of these criteria, says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Zayin, Ka'i al mashem mavua kan min ein mavui nitza v'chein adinin in kishlohi arech mavui arba amas. All of these conditions are missing. Ein nitza dinne kachotze v'alkein tzorich lezeh pas arba tfachim uchudel el v'seif base. So in these situations, you're going to need a pas arba or a Tzuras Hapesach if one of these criteria is missing. Tzuras Hapesach, says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Tes, v'zeh mahani afilu berachov me'eseh, and that will help you even if the opening is wider than 10. A Tzuras Hapesach will help. Uchudel el b'seif base, like we said back in seif base. Okay, back to the Mechaber. Actually, it's the Ramah now. V'yesh omrim. I'm in the second line before the bottom of the page. Says the Ramah Haggah. V'yesh omrim. Denagin ha'idna l'sakin kol ha'mavuas b'Tzuras Hapesach. Nowadays, the general practice is to always put a Tzuras Hapesach. T'chol ha'mavuas shelanu yesh loim din chatzeres, because our mavois generally have a din of a chotzer, and therefore it won't be sufficient to do a lechi or a curry, like we said, and you will need to have a Tzuras Hapesach. It's a much safer solution. Says the Mishnah Berurah, kol ha'mavuas bein sosum mitzad echol bein mefulish mishtei stodin bein rochav ad esa amas bein yosim esa amas. We always put a Tzuras Hapesach. T'chol ha'mavua shelanu hainu mishum mavoi seinu ein batzim b'chatzeres psuchas l'soichei. In our mavoi, we don't always have the houses and the chatzeres opening into the mavoi. V'lochein ein nitza b'lechi v'keira kedin heter mavoi, and therefore it doesn't have the normal heter mavoi function remedies. V'after b'chotze sagi b'shnei lechayayim mishnei asodin below Tzuras Hapesach. And even though really a chotze you could have two lechayayim on either side without a Tzuras Hapesach. Sometimes the mavoi is open on both sides. And then you would definitely need to have a Tzuras Hapesach. Sometimes you've got one of these problems, and therefore the Tzuras Hapesach is your only solution. And because of all of this, our practice, says the Ramah, is to always use a Tzuras Hapesach nowadays. If on one side of the mavoi it's not wider than 10 amas, yesh deis ben hachronim. There are different opinions. The das harbe mehem the shom sagi al kol ponim b'shnei lechayim b'shnei stodim. It would be sufficient to have on that situation two lechayim on both sides. V'lo boy Tzuras Hapesach, and you wouldn't need a Tzuras Hapesach for taimom. Dimon of shach. I'll tell you why you don't need a Tzuras Hapesach, because im din kamav mefulish. If it's got a din of a mav mefulish, halo boy gam boy kaimel on the kamon b'simen shin samach daled. The ein tzarich Tzuras Hapesach rak mitzad echad b'tzad hasheni sagi v'lechi a kera. You have a Tzuras Hapesach on one side. On the other end, a lechi or a kera will suffice. V'im din kachotze halo kol ponim dai b'shnei lechayim. That would suffice. V'yesh ma'achronim shemitzad haminag yesh lasos b'chol tzad Tzuras Hapesach. That like we've said, that achronim say that really the best thing to do is to have a Tzuras Hapesach on both sides. One should really try and be careful to do this. However, in this difficult situation, for example, shenifsak hachevel she'al gabe halachayim, the chevel breaks. B'Shabbos, so kol kiyai gavna, whatever, something, it's bad weather and the Eruv breaks and things like that. You can be makel not to require Tzuras Hapesach on each side when in a situation where one end is less than 10 amos wide, after paras mamlua, even though it's totally open. V'hinei, b'mavuas shelonu, in our mavuas, says the Mishnah Berurah, ha'nizkarim le'el, she'ein botim v'chatzeres b'suchas l'soichai, like we've described, imhu mavoi okum, if it's a bent mavoi, then yesh de'etz min bein achronim, im tzorich la'asos, tikkun ba'akmi masva, whether you got to fix up the crookedness, the bentness of the mavui, kadina mavui lekama b'siman shin samach dalet if gimel, which is the next siman. He'll discuss how to fix these bent mavuos. Yesh leima kiven de me'ika hadin yesh le din chotzer, since ultimately it's got a din of a chotzer, not of a mavui, ein tzorich shum tikkun. It's enough that you can do a tikkun on both ends. V'yesh machmir b'zeh, and there are those who are machmir. V'aminig lahakel v'da'id the hod mavud ayar shalonu tzuras hapesach, that which the Ramah says that our towns or city, little village setups require tzuras hapesach. Hainu ba'ayar she'ein mukafas chayma. That's talking about a city which is not walled. Or it's walled and it's breached into Rosh Hashanah on the Karmen is b'yosem es amas. Avol kashemukav chayma v'achayma lo nifritza. But if you've got a walled city and the wall is not breached in any way, you just have to differentiate between those two areas, that they won't asa for the Jewish residents to carry. In that situation, you won't need the Tzuras Hapesach. Rak dai bepas arba tfachim, oishnei pasim shashnei mashruyin. That would be enough. And it's not broader than a 10 amos opening. Okay. Because if it's totally walled, then it's got a din of a chotzer. Even if you didn't do any tikkun to differentiate between the two parts of this city, nevertheless, you can actually move the kelim that were there on the onset of Shabbos. Okay, and not from there into the house into the chotzer. Should we just quickly finish off? Okay, then the Ramah says, the same law, and our minhag is we put a rope around the reich of the width of the mavoi. The din chevel zeh in a kaira. It hasn't got a din of a kaira. In roch tefach, because of kaira, of course, there's got to be a thick tefach. V'lo mahani ele mitam tzuras hapesach, and it's functioning as a tzuras hapesach. The mahani lemala afilu begemi, that even a gemi, a little thin rope, will suffice. So siman shin samach beis. V'alkein yesh li zoy lahamid tachas hachevel shnei konim gevayim asara mechuvanim tachas hachevel. You're after all making a tzuras hapesach, so therefore you've got to have two uprights directly underneath the chevel. V'oz mahani afilu b'mavim mefulish b'torah tzuras hapesach afilu b'chotzer v'chol mokum shetzuras hapesach mahani, or any place where the tzuras hapesach will work. U'chumesh zvoy le'el seif siman shin samach beis. Okay, let's just finish the Mishnah Berurah. Tachas hachevel v'kiven sha'hakonim shelamata gevayim asara tefachim ein tzorich oid konim lemala liksha hachevel bohen. They don't need the chevel doesn't need to be directly on top of the uprights. They've got to just be positionally on top of them. They don't need to be touching. And the Chaim on Le'el b'soif siman shin samach beis the hakona shel mala ein tzorich liga b'hakonim shel mata. They don't need to touch, but they've got to be directly on top of. Gam hod mavua le'el b'soif siman shin samach beis the ein liksha hakona shel mala hayachevel min hatzad shel hakonim rak lemala al gaben hachel kushekeisha hachevel lemala al gag beizeh kona lo shaykh ledakdik ba'ofen hakshira im al gabo emitzidei. Anything which is going to be directly underneath the chevel will suffice. And if you've got a gag which is in between the chevel and the top of the corner, then it's not going to be a proper Tzuras Hapesach. And you can't make a Tzuras Hapesach where you've got a roof which is dividing between the top of the corner and the chevel. And it's actually yiftach nekev gadol begag lemala neged hakonim beinyan sheyu hakonim mechuvonim tachas hachevel beli hefsek. Again, you've got to get some sort of hole going through. There shouldn't be any hefsek. Okay, shnei konim. You put the chevel on top of two beams al haaretz. Avol Koste Mavoi ein Nachshavim b'Makom HaKonim. That won't count as konim. V'im Ika Amud b'Koisel Boilet. If there is a pillar or something in the wall which is projecting out, nidz mishum kona, that could count as a kona. Im somach alav me'er Shabbos, if you designated as such on erev Shabbos. V'lo garim melechi b'sif Yudalef, no worse than the lechi we spoke about in Yudalef. V'uadzin kasheyotzim me'akoisel chipupim pachas mishloshet tvachim at pachas mishloshet tvachim somach la'aretz, the little sort of grooves in the ground. Yesh lis mechalem me'er Shabbos l'shem konim shatzuras Hapesach u'bevad shiu mugulim lamala tachas hachevel, so long as they are exposed there underneath the chevel part of it. V'yesh machmirim b'chfufim ke'ele she'enim asuyim derech mezuzah Pesach v'lo choshev Pesach, they're not considered good enough. Imam b'takonim b'toich habayis, so b'toich geder hamukov merabah ruchosov lav klumhu, that's no good. V'afirim kona echot hamid sham gam kein lo mahani. Okay, let's just finish. Mechuvonim tachas hachevel v'imashu yetzim min atzad possible. If it's not directly aligned, no good. But Tzuras Hapesach rotzoleva mihani afilu b'yosem mi'ese amas, and that would help even if the opening is more than 10 amas. Okay, so nowadays, as the Ramah says, we would use the Tzuras Hapesach as described. Okay, good.